Jujutsu Kaisen has finally returned to our screens with its third season, and the opening 3 episodes have been nothing short of phenomenal. While the production quality remains as sharp as ever, it's the narrative shift that demands our attention for today's video. The shift is even reflected in the subtle transition in the directorial style for season 3, where a pointed effort seems to have been made to include more environmental storytelling than previous seasons. Kenjaku's actions at the end of Shibuya sparked a change. The world of Jujutsu Kaisen, already hostile to our protagonists, is now almost foreign. After all, the golden age of curses has been revived. We are currently standing at the precipice of the Culling game, a saga that represents Gege Akutami at his most ambitious. And that's not just a matter of scale or the escalating body count. This is Gege at his most ambitious because of the sheer complexity of the moving parts required to make this battle royale function. The conceptual framework of this saga is what sets it apart from everything else in the plot of Jujutsu Kaisen. This game, together with its pretext, mechanics, and players, is the culmination of centuries of methodical planning by Kenjaku, making it one of the most large-scale plot devices I've seen in manga. The arc that Gege's original drafts for the story were almost entirely centered around. Preparation for the Culling game was in motion right from the very beginning of this story, and even before the first chapter released, and everything about the arc supports this. It's easy to label Kenjaku as just another mastermind villain, but the Culling game proves he doesn't fit into this mold as one would expect. There's an added nuance to his tricks. Most antagonists of this kind feel the need to micromanage every variable to ensure their victory, or at least take the credit for it even if they didn't do all that. I'm looking at you, Aizen. Kenjaku, however, distinguishes himself from other mastermind villains by doing the exact opposite. He sets the stage, establishes the fundamental laws of the game, and then essentially lets go of the reins. He allows the ritual to evolve organically, trusting the nature of humanity he believed he'd deciphered, and in the agents he'd painstakingly transported into this era through cursed objects. This hands-off approach makes the Culling game unique among its contemporaries, as the antagonist is less of a puppet master and more of an architect who has walked away from the structure to see if it can stand on its own. My goal for this video sort of mirrors what Kenjaku did. Rather than use the plot device as a crutch in a character analysis like I normally would, I want to take a step back and talk about the game itself. We're going to explore the aspects of the Culling game that might not be immediately obvious. This won't be a simple plot recap leading up to the game's inception, you can find those everywhere. Instead, I want this to serve as a deep dive into the thematic underpinnings and the hidden details that elevate this arc. We're going to examine the deeper implications of Kenjaku's ritual, the pretexts that allowed it to exist, and where the logic of this system eventually leads us. The title Gege Akutami chose for this ritual, Shimetsu Kayu, is perhaps the most revealing detail of the entire saga. Viz went for Culling game, but a more accurate translation from Japanese to English would be Annihilation Migration. This is a specific biological phenomenon involving several species of fish. These fish, on a massive scale, are driven by warm currents into environments that differ significantly from their natural habitats. These creatures move with the currents when it is time to spawn, but they meet a grim end when the seasons shift. Because they cannot adapt to the sudden drop in temperature and lack the biological drive to migrate back, they die on the same massive scale. It is a chilling metaphor for the players, whom the story refers to using the kanji for swimmers. By entering the colonies, these individuals get thrust into a singularly unique and foreign ecosystem defined by relentless violence and alien rules. Existence itself is gamified, and they're required to be in a perpetual state of kill or be killed, a perpetual state of motion. If a player cannot adapt to this new world where cursed techniques and spirits roam without restraint, they are simply culled by the system. This concept of forced movement and adaptation is something Kenjaku views as a fundamental necessity for the evolution of humanity. Right before the monumental clash between the Guardian of the Old Order, Satoru Gojo, and the Harbinger of the Golden Age, Ryomen Sukuna, Kenjaku delivers a monologue that serves as his philosophical manifesto. He argues that the stability people crave is an illusion that breeds complacency and stagnation. To Kenjaku, the stillness of this modern world he detests is akin to a cage. Interestingly, this stillness is perfectly personified by Gojo himself. It's a triple entendre in a sense. Not only is he an immovable obstacle to Kenjaku's vision, Gojo's primary technique is the infinity, which literally forces any approaching object to slow down until it reaches a complete standstill. Lastly, it's It's because of Gojo's existence that much, if not all, of the Jujutsu world lies still. Those on his side stagnate because he can handle any threat all by himself. There's no reason for them to do anything. Those he antagonizes stay still because they can't do anything about him. By sealing Gojo and initiating the game, Kenjaku effectively shattered that stillness on both ends, forcing the world to move again regardless of the cost in human life. The ultimate objective of the Culling game is described as moving the people of Japan to the other side. The kanji used here is higan, a term deeply rooted in Buddhist eschatology. It refers to the distant shore, an allegory for nirvana or enlightenment. In a more technical sense, higan is a translation of the Sanskrit word paramita, which signifies the perfection or culmination of specific spiritual values. A tongue-in-cheek pointer to the very premise of the Culling game, which is the perfect culmination of Kenjaku's ideals. But for the participants, this migration to the other side is a literal journey toward death. The other side in this context is the afterlife, making the entire battle royale a mass ritual of transition where the only perfection achieved is the absolute seizing of the individual self. Some translations of Shimetsu Kaiju can also be read as abortive migration, which is highly significant in its own right. I dare say it might even be the translation that best matches Gege's intent. Kenjaku is a figure who consistently perverts the concept of motherhood. He parasitized the body of Kaori Itadori to give birth to Yuji, and his domain expansion, Womb Profusion, is named after the Garba Dhatu, or the womb realm that's featured in esoteric Buddhism. While the womb realm is traditionally associated with the nurture of compassion and the potential for enlightenment, Kenjaku uses it as a site of destruction. He called his own creations, the death painting wombs, absolute failures. All that to say, it is entirely consistent with his character that his magnum opus, the Culling game, would be titled after a failed or short-circuited birth process. To push the point home, consider that by introducing a glitch into the rules of his own game, he effectively causes the life of what we can call his dream child to terminate prematurely. Nothing more I need to say. Abortive migration is a very fitting name for Kenjaku's game. The fish imagery that permeates the series reinforces these themes of adaptation and doomed existence. One of the species known to undergo annihilation migration is the emperor angelfish, which we can recognize from the very first opening of the anime. That fish was a symbolic stand-in for Junpei Yoshino, a boy who was forcibly dragged into the world of Jujutsu by Mahito. Junpei died because he could not adapt. Ironically, he did physically change after Mahito used idol transfiguration to reshape his brain so he could use the technique. And that goes to show an appropriate physical transformation is the barest essential to even contend with the world of Jujutsu, but that alone is not enough. This very point is emphasized again in the most offhand interaction between Kenjaku and his Kogane, where it's revealed that as many as 61 sorcerers died because they refused to adapt. To add to the irony I just spoke of, Junpei's technique summoned a jellyfish Shikigami. Unlike the Emperor Angelfish, jellyfish are remarkably versatile and follow a daily migration pattern that aligns with the sun. They represent the adaptability that Junpei lacked, serving as cruel foreshadowing of his failure to survive the current he was caught in. We see this same struggle with destiny in the star plasma vessel, Riko Amanai. During the Hidden Inventory arc, Riko pictures herself as a fish being guided by currents rather than her own will. She initially views this as a natural law that must be accepted with resignation, if not reverence. However, the scene at the aquarium in the third episode of the second season suggests a shift in her perspective. As she gazes at the fish behind the glass, she seems to realize that she is not a fish in the open ocean, but a fish in a tank. What's more, it's the same juvenile Emperor Angelfish she pictures as a later scene reinforces. Her life was only considered valuable because of her role as the star plasma vessel, and she was raised in controlled conditions just to be used as a tool for Tengen's evolution. Her tragedy was that she desired to be a regular fish in the free waters. Having to be guided by the currents of a normal life didn't sound that bad after all, especially if she went through it together with the other fish in the school, without her existence being defined by an external power. Even the most influential figures in this series are associated with this imagery, such as when Sukuna and Kenjaku travel inside a cursed spirit that resembles a massive fish. While these instances vary in their specific meanings, the symbol of the fish carries a heavy weight in a general religious sense, particularly within the Christian canon. Early Christians used the ichthys symbol as a secret identifier and as a mark of them paying obeisance to Christ. The Greek word ekthys itself is an acronym that, when expanded, translates to Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. This makes the fish a primary symbol for a messianic figure. Yuji Itadori is heavily characterized with these tropes. He is the self-sacrificing chosen one who carries the sins of others within his own body. In this light, Yuji is the most prominent fish of the series. Unlike Junpei or Riko, Yuji survives by sheer force of will. He adapts by consuming whatever is necessary, from Sukuna's finger to his own brothers, to ensure he can stand on the same level as his enemies. To understand the true intent behind the Culling game, we must look at the figure who serves as its primary inspiration, Ryomen Sukuna. He is a being who has organically transcended the boundaries between humanity and cursed spirits, representing the latent potential of cursed energy that Kenjaku has spent centuries trying to realize. The how and why of Sukuna being the reference point of the Culling game can be traced back to Sukuna's own origins, which are rooted in a specific urban legend from Akutami's home region. I've mentioned this urban legend in a few videos before, but never in this context. The parallels between the legend and the mechanics of the Culling game are striking. At its core, the Culling game is a macro-scale version of an ancient Chinese practice known as Gu, or more commonly in Japan, the Kodoku ritual. The way this ritual works, as per records left behind in ancient Chinese historical texts, medical literature and folklore, is that a variety of venomous insects or animals are placed into a single jar and left to slaughter one another. The sole survivor is believed to have concentrated the toxins and malice of all its fallen cohabitants within itself, resulting in a potent poison or a powerful curse. It is a concept we see utilized in series like Hunter x Hunter for the Succession War or the Blue Lock Project, but Gege applies it with a much more literal, biological focus. The word Kodoku itself is a homophone for the word for loneliness, which is perhaps the most significant theme surrounding Sukuna and his various interactions in the entire Culling game saga. The game itself is essentially a giant jar, something that the Season 3 opening emphasizes on by making the colony barriers look like cylindrical jars that Kenjaku is setting down. Furthermore, the rules are designed to ensure that only the most refined, evolved life form remains. Moving on to the urban legend concerning Sukuna's birth, what we know of it from the 2chan post that serves as its origins aligns perfectly with this ritualistic mindset. The story tells of Siamese twins born to a destitute family in the Iwate prefecture. After being sold to a freak show, they were eventually acquired by a cult leader named Mononobe Tengoku. This man locked the twins in a room with other individuals possessing physical deformities and left them without food or water. The twins resorted to cannibalism to survive, effectively winning a makeshift Kodoku match. Tengoku then starved them to death, slit the unified torso's stomach open and filled it with cremated remains of criminals, mummified their remains, and used their corpses as a catalyst to bring disasters upon Japan. The visual echoes of this legend in the manga are impossible to ignore. Sukuna's Heian form with its two faces and the massive mouth located on his stomach directly references the anatomical features of the twins and the incisions mentioned in the folklore. Even the mummified remains, or sokushinbutsu, of Sukuna that we see at the start of the series and right before Gojo vs Sukuna serve as a narrative anchor for this connection. Sukuna is essentially a living calamity, a curse born from the most extreme conditions of survival and refined through a process of extreme combat throughout the course of his existence. The second part of our key to understanding how and why Sukuna is Kenjaku's muse actually lies in his body. Before the clash of the strongest sorcerers across history begins, we're told that the essence of excellence in Jujutsu lies in subtraction. If you can remove unnecessary movements or chants while maintaining the power of a technique, you have reached a higher level of mastery. Both Gojo and Sukuna, however, reject this entirely in their fight. They both use hand signs and chants to their advantage at various points. It says something when a rule that should apply to everyone is broken as easily as stepping on an ant by the two sorcerers that are powerful beyond reason. Are they doing something right that the rest of the sorcerers are doing wrong? Not really. The rule holds up for everyone that cannot stand on the same realm as Gojo and Sukuna. They represent the pinnacle of sorcery, and they're closer to the vision of cursed energy optimization that Kenjaku has than the rest of the sorcerers are to them. Sukuna takes it a step further and outright maximizes his Jujutsu. He has optimized his body through addition. By possessing 4 arms and 2 mouths, he can maintain a continuous stream of hand signs and incantations without ever needing to pause for breath or sacrifice physical defense. As long as he has cursed energy, he can keep spamming techniques continuously, and these would be techniques buffed to 120% efficacy to boot. Kenjaku's obsession with Sukuna stems from the fact that Sukuna represents an optimization that Kenjaku could never achieve through direct creation. He admitted that whatever he creates cannot exceed the limits of his own potential, and despite his brilliance, Kenjaku does not inhabit the same transcendental realm as Sukuna or Gojo. His previous attempts to bridge this gap are visible in the death painting wounds. If you look closely at Choso, Eso, and Kechizu, you can see that they possess fragmented physical traits that seem to mimic Sukuna's design. Kechizu's oversized second mouth resembles Sukuna's stomach mouth. Eso's winking technique parallels Sukuna's own extra limbs, and the distinct markings on Choso's face that seem to be tied to his technique is also shared by Sukuna. Whatever features make the 3 eldest death painting wombs distinct all feel like developmental sketches of the King of Curses. However, these brothers were ultimately failures in Kenjaku's eyes. While powerful, they didn't even surpass Kenjaku, much less Sukuna, nor did they represent a new stage of evolution. This failure is precisely why Kenjaku decided to stop trying to build a masterpiece with his own hands. Instead, he decided to recreate the conditions of the Kodoku ritual on an unprecedented scale. By turning effectively the entirety of Japan into a jar and forcing its inhabitants to consume one another, he is betting that the chaos will produce something even he could not imagine. Time to appreciate the centuries of groundwork required to bring the Culling game to fruition. This section is vital because it provides the necessary context for Kenjaku's most fascinating trait, his lack of attachment to the process, and I'll explain what I mean by attachment in a minute. The thing is, I said at the beginning of this video that I want to step away from character analysis and just talk about the game alone, but I have to break that promise for this particular section. Kenjaku is an agent of chaos, but his name, which signifies devoted compassion, and the visual identity he borrowed from Geto, position him as a bodhisattva, someone that has achieved Buddhahood, an enlightened state, but chooses to remain in the material world to guide mortals down the path to nirvana. And perhaps the most well-known thing about Buddhism is that it holds attachment to be the root of suffering. Kenjaku puts this tenet into practice. The guy literally spent centuries planning something, and he's willful enough to let go of the reins and not fall into the trap of trying to dominate the game himself. This detachment from the process is central to his identity. He knows himself and he knows his limits. A master planner, deity figure shonen antagonist that isn't a massive hypocrite. It's actually quite refreshing. And of course, I have trouble conceptualizing truly how long it took for him to lay the groundwork, and so does everyone watching this. We can't even live a tenth of that time, which is why understanding the sheer number of moving parts that had to be positioned just right for the Culling game to kick off successfully is integral. The physical architecture of the game is perhaps the best evidence of his ingenuity. It relies entirely on the pre-existing barrier system maintained by Tengen. Throughout Japan, Tengen maintained several pure barriers which serve to suppress the manifestation of cursed spirits and at the same time enhance the effectiveness of simpler techniques like curtains used by managers like Ijichi or Nita. One of these structures is a colossal barrier that bisects Japan lengthwise, and it is upon this foundation that Kenjaku anchored the Bon barriers which contain the 10 colonies. This stratagem placed Tengen in an impossible position. If she were to collapse the pure barriers to stop the game, it wouldn't be an overstatement to say that the entire foundation of modern Jujutsu would crumble. Barrier techniques with a millennium of history would be lost, and cursed spirits would emerge at a rate that would overwhelm the sorcerers. In an instance where Gojo is gone, that is a truly terrifying prospect. Kenjaku gambled on the idea that Tengen would choose the lesser of the two evils, believing that she would rather allow the game to proceed and trust that her own agents would win the game on its own terms than invite total societal collapse. Even Kenjaku's eventual decision to absorb Tengen after the battle at the Star Corridor shows a complex relationship with the idea of control. By using cursed spirit manipulation to essentially seize the administrator role, he introduced a glitch into the system he had previously claimed to leave to its own devices. The mechanical or the real-world drivers of his decision are simple enough to understand. The reason he originally ceded total control was to massively expand the scope of the game in exchange, in a classic binding vow. The rules he added via the glitch set the destination of the game, whereas it previously didn't have one. This is less micromanagement and more like creative directing in a broad stroke sense, but it still has some interesting implications for his character. This is the moment that injects nuance into the idea that Kenjaku is beyond hypocrisy. He's a scientist that engages with the world around him armed with nothing but pure curiosity, attached to nothing except the drive to see the next new thing come about by his hand. The means don't matter, as long as the ends are within his reach. This is how I make sense of the scene where Kenjaku says he pictures himself as a child before a blank canvas. He's the one painting a picture in this vision, but not even he knows what the picture will end up looking like. Is this hypocrisy? It could be interpreted as such. Gege even hammered something in from this angle in Modulo, where the very embodiments of the evolution in cursed energy Kenjaku sought to bring about literally just dropped from the sky. Maybe he would have gotten to live his dream if he weren't obstinate about bringing it about himself. But the fact remains that when he died at the hands of Yuta, he seemed alright. Not even a quiet "damn it" escaped the man's mouth. I can't say that he was bothered at all by the fact that he wouldn't be able to see the thing he was working towards for centuries. He's forgotten what regret even feels like. So again, is this hypocrisy? I can't really say. It's too open-ended. I'm posing this question to you guys. Let me know in the comments what you think. Anyway, back to the Culling game. The reality is that the game is a house of cards that required 1,000 years of perfect conditions to stay upright. It can only happen because Satoru Gojo was removed from the board, as his existence as the bearer of the Six Eyes was a fated deterrent to Kenjaku's plan. His only recourse was to seal the Six Eyes, but just that act took the orchestration of an incident that ended up flattening an entire city. Nothing comes cheap in this plan. It also required the specific existence of Suguru Geto, whose technique was the only tool capable of domesticating Tengen. It required the birth of Mahito, whose idol transfiguration provided the spark necessary to activate the dormant sorcerers and non-sorcerers alike. Even more impressively, it required the intervention of Toji Fushiguro. As a man completely severed from the flow of cursed energy, Toji was a wildcard who could break the chains of fate. By killing Riko Amanai, he disrupted the cycle of the Star Plasma Vessel in a way that fate itself could not repair. Any other assassin would have failed in the grand scheme of things because the universe would have conspired to replace the girl somehow, which is also exactly what would have happened if Kenjaku killed Gojo when he was a baby. But Toji's presence was a structural error in the world that Kenjaku exploited. These are three factors Kenjaku couldn't produce himself. He had to play a waiting game and strike at just the right moment to create the perfect conditions for his desired outcomes. In a way, harnessing the invariable effects of fate and turning them into advantages for oneself is more impressive than just producing those outcomes through one's own efforts. Finally, we have to consider the sheer diplomatic effort involved in this. Kenjaku traversed different eras of history, persuading sorcerers from the Heian and Edo periods to enter into binding vows and transform themselves into cursed objects. He even managed to secure a deal with Ryomen Sukuna, a being so temperamental that he could have just as easily made sashimi out of Kenjaku instead. Yes, I made a subtle reference to fish. Not so subtle because I had to fucking explain it, but I hope somebody caught that before I explained it. And at the center of it all is Yuji Itadori. Huge parts of the Culling game arc happening the way they did is only thanks to Yuji turning out to be a self-sacrificing kid. There's no doubt in my mind that Kenjaku probably had backup plans if Yuji actually died at any one of those points where his life was at serious risk, like at the penitentiary, or when Choso took him down in Shibuya, or even if Yuta's reverse curse technique failed to revive him after they fought. Hell, Yuji could have also just refused to swallow any fingers in the first place. Safe to say, it worked out in Kenjaku's favor for most of the story that Yuji turned out the way he did. I like to think that it wasn't just his grandfather's curse driving his actions in the story, but also another curse embedded deeper into his psyche, placed there by his mother. Every step of the way to creating the game was a gamble, and these are just the steps that we're privy to. Like I said, appreciating the scale of the game and what it took to get there is a necessary ingredient in understanding exactly the kind of strength of will it takes for the orchestrator to be ready to step away from it at a moment's notice. The concept of sunk costs doesn't exist in Kenjaku's mind, and I think that makes for a very interesting character to watch on screen. The mechanics of the Culling game offer a fascinating insight into the goal outcome of the game itself. Earlier I talked about the near universally applicable axiom of subtraction being the essence of excellence in Jujutsu, and how Sukuna stands in defiance of that axiom. The Culling game's objective is to produce a being that can surpass Sukuna, and the rivet of Sukuna swearing by maximalism is reflected in the very rules of the game, which operate on a principle of addition. Rules can be added, but they can never be subtracted. Also consider the rule regarding the expenditure of points. To add a rule, a player must spend 100 points. As long as the basic structure or the longevity of the game doesn't get impacted, the game master has to accept every rule. Another prohibition the players have to work with, however, is the fact that they can't count the 5 points they're worth among the 100 they need to spend in order to add a rule. In a manner of speaking, you'd be subtracting your own life, and the fact that the game encourages killing but not self-destruction says volumes about the objectives of the game and the beliefs of the game developer. Within this structure, Maki Zenin exists as a total anomaly. Because of her complete lack of cursed energy, the barriers that define the colonies perceive her as nothing more than an inorganic object. She's treated the same way the system treats a building or a lamppost. This means she's never officially registered as a player, allowing her to move between colonies and interact with the game with a level of freedom that is fundamentally impossible for anyone else. Conversely, Satoru Gojo faced another kind of singling out. When Kenjaku eventually introduced the rule that prohibited new players from entering the game, he effectively locked Gojo out of the framework entirely. While the other protagonists are registered as players, Gojo never was. He's an external force that the system refuses to acknowledge. This exclusion only mirrors what Gojo has faced throughout his life. From birth, he has been pedestalized to the point that he's always been outside the social framework occupied by everyone else, the only brief respite he got being through Geto. This exclusion has a profoundly dehumanizing effect, and it highlights one of the most compelling dynamics in the series, which is the contrast between Maki and Gojo. They're both outsiders, but while Maki is free and independent of the structures that exert pressure on everyone else, Gojo is an emblem of those very structures, paradoxically robbing him of all semblance of freedom. I'm actually working on a Maki video that will likely be the longest JJK video on the channel, where I intend to dive much deeper into this specific parallel and how it defines their respective characters and choreographs the endgame of the story itself. If you don't want to miss that when it drops, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. The best way I can describe this arc is as a tapestry woven from the threads of urban legends, mythology, philosophical tenets, and Gege's signature character writing. I hope I have done the framework of this arc justice in my attempt to convey why I find it so fascinating. It's rare to see a battle royale where the mechanics of the game itself serve as a direct reflection of the antagonist's internal logic and frame of mind. I for one can't wait to see what kind of magic we're gonna get from MAPPA this season. I should be uploading this video on the day the Maki episode releases, and given the staff list that has been circulating around Twitter, that should be one for the ages. That said, I'd love to hear what you guys think about the Culling games, what you like and dislike in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.